So good evening again. Nice to be with you. This is my last evening in Singapore this time around. What to talk about? One of the ways I think we could think about Buddhism is that, as I was saying after lunch today, that it's and I often say this, that it is, to some extent, it's an education, a learning, and then also it's a craft, it's a practice, and then also it's a product called good human beings, maybe. And the education piece is varied, but one of the things we need to educate ourselves is the nature of wanting. Because if we don't understand wanting, and we are directed by misunderstandings around wanting, then the results will be suffering. If we understand wanting and understand the nature of wanting, then we can liberate the mind from suffering. So studying something means you have to reflect, right? You have to observe, you have to look, you have to consider. And studying something is not the same as believing something. So if you believe that wanting is wrong or bad, that's not study. That's just an opinion that someone has maybe given you. Or if you think that just following all your wantings is going to give a result and you don't watch cause and effect, then that also wouldn't be study. So the capacity to study is also, it's like the capacity to reflect. Not only can I do things in the world, participate in the world, I can notice how I'm participating in the world. Not only can I feel inspired, I can notice that I feel inspired. Not only can I feel disappointed, I can notice that I feel disappointed. Not only can I feel anxious, I can notice that you get the idea, awareness, reflection. Now, without awareness and reflection, we are simply, I would say, reactive animals. We get some stimuli, like and dislike, we react to that. There's no real freedom. But reflection isn't the same as just thinking about something. I think it's more profound. It's actually observing cause and effect and the flow of things. So the question would be then, are we seeking, we're all seeking something, right? That's why we're here. That's why we endure an hour of pain in our knees and falling asleep for half an hour. And, it's not easy, is it? You've probably all been to work today, right? You've had a long day, and then you come here and you spend this evening together, and you invest time in that. So why do we do that? What is the reason that we're here? Well, I suspect we're looking for peace. We're looking for an end of suffering. All of us are the same that way. So the question around wanting is, can an object, can our desires ever be fulfilled? Are we seeking the fulfillment of our desires? Is that what we're seeking? And can that ever work? So what can we desire? We can desire experiences. Emotional experiences, shopping experiences, intellectual experiences, creative experiences. There's all manner of experiences we can have. Is that what we're looking for? Are we looking for an experience? And are we looking to always have what we want? Well, I would suggest that what we're looking for is the end of wanting, rather than an object. You notice when you get what you want, which is not very often, but when you get what you want, is it the object that is bringing peace, or is it the end of wanting? I would suggest it's the end of wanting. And the object is actually a distraction. So you get the object, the experience, the emotional experience, or the relationship, or whatever, and for some moment, wanting falls away. You don't want anything. You think, oh yeah. And you think it's the object. And then because you think it's the object, you try to pursue that object again, but then you can't get it. So if we explore wanting, one of the analogies which I found useful from the text is that wanting can be intelligent or it can be ignorant. Like my body is a wanting body. Its biological nature is that it desires comfort, it fears pain, it needs food, and emotionally it likes companionship and love. That's the kind of biological makeup of me. So wanting is not wrong. But wanting, of course, has its limits. It has limitations, because as much as I would like the world to fit into my wanting patterns, I've noticed, and you probably noticed, that the world was not designed for my wanting. Has anyone noticed that? The tomorrow, whatever you experience tomorrow, is not designed to fit your wanting patterns. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's a design fault, right? So if I think that my fulfillment comes from fulfilling my wanting, then what do I do with the reality of life? I feel frustrated, right? I feel averse or fearful or whatever. But if I study wanting, like if whatever happens to you tomorrow, you decide that you're going to observe the nature of wanting, how it works in the mind, how it operates, then you become a witness to Dharma, the Dharma of wanting. The analogy I like from the texts is an analogy where a wanting is not understood. And it's the analogy of ignorance. And the analogy you have in the text is about a skin disease. So, say in Ontario, where I'm from, in Canada, we have a plant called poison ivy. You've heard of that for you who lived in North America? And poison ivy is a nasty bit of business. If you walk in it, and I once, unfortunately, went camping and fell asleep in it. Not good. The ivy has a chemical, liquid form, that comes onto your skin. When it comes onto bare skin, it creates a toxic reaction on your skin, and you get a rash. And the beauty of poison ivy is that when you scratch it, it rips open the blisters, and the blisters spread, and you get more rash. So for a square inch of rash, if you scratch that, you'll get 5 square inches of rash, and it will itch even more. So I've had poison ivy, and it really itches. So then I try not to scratch it. Maybe then when I have a shower, it just drives me nuts, and then I scratch it. And, that feels so good. It just feels so nice. I'm scratching, and I'm like, oh, this is great. Of course, after the shower, I look, oops. Now I've got more of the disease. Now I have more itching than I had before. So I make a determination, I put some calamine lotion on, and I say, I'm not going to scratch. Of course, an hour later, I forget. And then I scratch again. Oh, it's so good. It really is. It's just so pleasurable. So now my desire is being fulfilled. I'm getting what I want. Right? I'm getting the end of itching. And not only am I getting the end of itching, I'm getting extreme pleasure. It really is extremely pleasurable. But, now it's all up my arm. Now I got a problem. So at some point in this little drama of itching and scratching, I have the insight that I need to forego short-term satisfaction and pleasure for long-term end of the disease. I have to forego the short-term pleasure of scratching, right, if I'm going to put an end to the disease. And that takes determination and intelligence, and then I forget. Until there's something in me says, Viradama, you've only got so much skin. You're going to have to do something. And a determination arises, I will not scratch. Now the itching is still there, that's the problem. Just by saying to myself, I will not scratch, it doesn't put an end to the itching. And so the temptation is scratch, scratch, scratch. Come on, just a little bit. But the insight and the renunciation of that is saying, no, I'm not going there. No way, Jose, I know you. I know you, Mara. Huh? And I think we all have that, where we have, all of us have foregone short-term satisfaction for long-term goals. You, as a student, maybe you wanted to not study and maybe watch television or whatever. You said, no, I'm going to study. I'm going to forego short-term satisfaction for long-term goals. So this is just intelligent way to do it. Now, the thing about wanting, which is not based on wisdom, is that the mind is always going out into objects, thoughts, emotions, stuff, gadgets, relationships, memories. It's always going out into objects of mind, I would say. So by objects, I mean physical feelings, sight, sounds, tastes, emotions, memories, plans, thoughts, and so on. These are objects of mind. And the desire mind then seeks fulfillment and satisfaction in objects. And I would suggest that objects can never satisfy desire because their nature is transient and they're out of your control. They arise dependent on causes and conditions. So then you have the insight that true freedom must be the end of wanting, not by getting what I want, but by foregoing the pursuit of wanting for the long-term end of the disease. And that we would call nibbana. Right? And so one of the ways we define nibbana, or the unconditioned, is the ceasing of unskillful wanting. Biological wanting will always be there. You know, this body will always be hungry. It's just the nature of the body. It will want to be free from fear. Like if I see like we have bears in the monastery, B-E-A-R, not B-A-R-E. So I don't go up to the bear and say, I run. I run away from the bear because I have biological fear, because the bear is a bit tougher than me and could rip me open. So I'm very cautious, right? So that's a good fear. But I've also had fears and anxieties which were social, which were induced by delusion and so on. And understanding those is different than biological fear. So craving or wanting needs to be understood in the context of its naturalness, but also where it becomes unnatural. So let's take something like looking at your iPhone. It's a very interesting, like if you ever, like let's say you're going to fly to Toronto tomorrow. You're going to spend a lot of time waiting in airports. Believe me, I do this a lot. Huh? And let's say you've got 2-hour wait in Beijing, because your connecting flight is in Beijing to, what's the capital of Taiwan? Taipei? To Taipei, which I have. Okay, you're 2 hours now, and you have a device. Most people have a device. The device is very good. We can communicate, and we can look at YouTube and make things and so on. But now you've got really nothing to do. You've got to wait 2 hours. And what do? You seek an object. You look at the iPad and you look at news sites or fashion sites or whatever sites you want, right? So your mind has nothing to do, so what do? You fill it with an object. And that satisfies your desire for a little bit of time, right? And then you go to the next website, right? And then you get bored with it and you put it down. For how long? 20 seconds? And then the boredom hits you, and then you say, yeah, but emails, Facebook, Line, WhatsApp, you know. And then you get bored, you put it down, and then, yeah, but, and that's itching and scratching, isn't it? And that's what's going on. But it's not immoral, and you won't get put in prison, and you probably won't be too neurotic, but you will be distracted because your mind will be going out to objects. Again, it's not. I'm not putting this down because monks can be very kind of sour grapes, and you shouldn't have an iPhone. No. I suggest studying that. What if you, when you're in Beijing airport, you actually use this model of itching and scratching to look at unfulfilled desire, That would be studying Dharma, the Dharma of wanting. Just thinking that you should not look at the iPhone wouldn't work either, because that's just repressive. So you feel guilty about looking at your iPhone. That's not wisdom. That's not investigation. But what if you did that as an experiment? I'm challenging you now. Wherever you are, and you actually made an intention to observe wanting. And that's what you have to do. If you're going to study something, you have to make the intention to study it. Not the intention to get rid of this, but to actually observe the nature of that. And what you'll observe is that you might take it on board, and after 5 minutes you think that was a stupid idea, and you look at your iPhone. And after a while you say, no, I want to look at this seriously. I don't want to just do this frivolously. I'd really like to look at that. So then you begin to see, well, it's not about the object, it's about the mind's restlessness. The mind's need to always go out into objects. And so as you look at that restlessness of mind, you say, well, that's craving. The craving for experience. The craving to go out into objects. And now you think, oh, I want to see wanting. What does unfulfilled wanting feel like? And now you have the itch, right? And now you're trying to practice with not scratching. And it's not so difficult, but why, after a certain amount of time you give that up. But if you observe that, if you do that for 5 or 10 minutes, then the need to pick up the phone begins to fall away. And you begin to have a peace which is not dependent on the iPhone, which is not dependent on an object. It's different, isn't it? And that peace now is not because you got what you wanted, but because you saw the end of wanting. And that's what Nibbana is pointing to. It's the end of wanting. It's a different kind of peace because it's not dependent. If your phone crashes or you haven't got Wi-Fi or your chip burns out or whatever happens to these things, it's okay, because now your fulfillment is no longer dependent on an object. Your mind has freedom from objects. It's a very interesting thing to look at. And if we're serious about the Dharma, these are the kinds of experiments which are very, very interesting and useful, because that's ordinary life. You can only meditate on a cushion every now and then, right? And you can do a retreat once a year, which is great. Do it, go for it, yeah. But what about 24/7? What about Dharma as 24/7? What about awareness as 24/7? What about investigation as 24/7? And the understanding of desire, the observation of desire is tremendously important. One of the, you might have heard this rendition, I think you'd all be aware of the Four Noble Truths. Everyone is kind of on board for that. There's suffering, the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. The cause is attachment to craving, the end is the abandonment of craving, and there's the Noble Eightfold Path. So that, if you're a card-carrying Buddhist, you should know that, and try to do that. Try to do that as a practice. But another way to formulate that was a very interesting monk called Ajahn Dun. You might have heard of him. He was contemporary to Ajahn Chah. He had a different way of formulating it. So follow me on this. And he puts the second noble truth first, switches around. So he says the mind going outside is suffering. No, the mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind is the path. The result of the mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. Take the model of the iPhone now, itching and scratching. The mind going outside is suffering. Now, it's not the suffering of a toothache. It's not the suffering of losing your mom. It's not the suffering of death. No, it's much more subtle. It's the spiritual suffering of distraction and restlessness. So the mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. So you may not think that going on Facebook is suffering. And that word might be a bit too big, but it is distracting, and it does take you away from peace. And if we're interested in peace, then we see that all this mind going outside all the time is not peaceful. It's not bad. It's not immoral. So hopefully we're beyond that. I mean, we're all living morally and so on and so forth. But the mind going outside, always to objects, is a very unpeaceful mind. It's distracted, it's needy, it's unsettled, it's not peaceful. And it is the mind of desire. So the mind going outside is the cause. The result of the mind going outside is suffering. The mind knowing the mind is the path. The result of the mind knowing the mind is the end of suffering. So, let's say you're lined up for the flight now, right? You've had your 2 hours of Facebook or whatever, and you're lined up in a queue to get on the flight. And then someone butts in front of you very rudely, and you feel the arising of aversion, right? The mind going outside, that idiot, I'm a stupid person, what kind of animal is that? That's the mind going outside. It's the cause, and the result is suffering. The mind knowing the mind is what? It's like, oh, aversion feels this way. Annoyance feels this way. The mind knowing the mind is the path, and the result of the mind knowing the mind is not suffering. You're not suffering, it's just aversion. Aversion isn't suffering, it's just a condition. It's just a habit that comes up into mind. It's only when we grasp it, attach to it, and believe in it, that it becomes whole-blown in suffering. The mind knowing the mind is the path, and then you feel the annoyance, and you want to poke the person, but you don't, and you don't look at them with daggers. You just bear witness, and there's the cessation of the condition and the cessation of desire. And this is peace. We're moving towards peace in this way. Very simple, right? But our desires are very complex. So that's an easy example. Let's say you feel social, like I was talking about social anxiety. A lot of us have suffered from that. Wanting people to like you, say. Wanting people to approve of you. Being afraid of authority. A lot of people are afraid of me. I'm a pussycat. I don't know why they're afraid of me. But authority figures can make us quite afraid, can't they? It might be a reflection or whatever. So the arising of fear, right? And when fear arises, there's the desire not to have the fear. So not only is there fear, but there's a desire not to have the fear. There's the desire for security, obviously. And so what do? We create an ego. We create language. We create ways of being where we can survive the fear. We become obsequious or whatever we do. And that we don't see that desire. But when we know fear is fear, we say, oh, fear feels this way. And it's more complex, more difficult. But when fear feels this way, and we awaken to that, it feels this way, and we're patient with unfulfilled desire. And this is hard because we don't want the fear. So we'll play games or do anything but notice the fear. And this isn't biological fear. I'm not saying that you now go into the most, you go into a dark alley and get beat up. I'm not advocating that. It's just the natural social fears we have. When they arise in the heart, is fear the problem, or is it the attachment to fear, the preoccupation with fear? That's the problem, I would say, because fear is simply a condition that comes and goes. So when the mind knows fear is fear, that's the mind knowing the mind. And in the knowing of fear, there is desire to get away or to do something, and you know that desire, and you bear with the fear, and the fear ceases, and that's the end of desire, it's the end of fear, and that's what we're pointing to, peace of the mind, nibbana. Now you can see that is much more difficult. Social fears, worries. So someone asked me a question yesterday about worry about the child, the welfare of a child. I mean, that's something, you do worry about these things, right? And what's going on there? Well, there's the desire that the child always be safe and not have suffering. Is that possible? No, it's not possible. And yet the desire mind tries to make the impossible possible. And so we worry and we worry and we worry. And to live and not know and not be secure is very hard. But worry, notice that worry doesn't solve the problem. Worry begets more worry, right? We've all had this, haven't we? You kind of get this worry, and then you solve it. Worry. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, but worry. I got it. No. And then you get another question, and another worry, another question, another worry, and it goes on and on and on. What's going on there? Itching and scratching, right? You have a sense of insecurity, or a sense of fear comes up. You do everything you can, due diligence, and you're responsible, but still, because the future is unknown, unsure, you start to run with that, the unsureness and the unknownness, and that's itching and scratching. Maybe in the future this might happen, and you don't like that, so you start to worry, and that's the itching, that's the scratching. I mean, and you scratch for a while, and then that was good, that was nice, and then the itch comes up again, another but if, itching and scratching. So how do you put an end to worry? Well, not by not by being irresponsible, I'm not saying that, but you learn to live with insecurity, the natural insecurity of not knowing the future, and that is unpleasant. And desire mind does not like the unpleasant. Desire mind likes the pleasant. So when the unpleasant arises, what do? We seek the pleasant. But you realize that you cannot always have the pleasant. I mean, we know that. And yet we seek it. So does the pleasant fulfill you? No, because the pleasant conditions the unpleasant. So you feel the unpleasantness of not knowing, of insecurity. You say, insecurity feels this way. It has this feeling. And then you bear witness to it, the desire to get, it feels this way. And it ceases, the desire ceases, and you have peace. So what I'm suggesting is that peace does not come about through the fulfillment of desire. It comes about through the cessation of desire. And that's the third noble truth, isn't it? Nirodha is the cessation of desire. How does desire cease? You have to bear witness to it. How did the itching of the skin disease, how did it cease? Not by scratching more, but by bearing with unfulfilled desire. And that takes patience and wisdom and intelligence. And that kind of basic intelligence, I will forego short-term gratification for the long-term end of the disease. That's what the Buddha is asking us to do. So these are, there are various ways this come up, and this is the theory. So I would suggest that it's a very good model to look at itching and scratching in your own inner world. Not in a way where you're hurting yourself. Like you could think this means like if you're sitting in meditation, you should never move on pain. No, that's stupid. Pain is there to help you move, right? It's not a forced thing. It's an intelligent thing. It's a wise thing, a consideration. And the Buddhism is very intelligent, right? It's not forceful. So you start to develop this inquiry around desire and the limits of desire and how desire is useful and where it's not useful, so that you have an intelligence or an education around desire, and then you start to practice. You start to practice patient endurance of unfulfilled desire. And the results are good because you find an independence of heart which isn't dependent on objects. You can still enjoy life. You can still drink coffee or tea or have dumplings or potato chips, whatever you like. It's not about that. It's something more profound than just suppressing things, something much more profound. And it is intelligent. It really is intelligent. So I think I've kind of thrown out a whole bunch of ideas for you there. Maybe I could stop there and then open to some questions. Please, yes. Brave woman. First one is always the one.
I would like to ask how to develop endurance and determination
Give me an example.
You are saying about the itchy and scratching, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at last you actually realize that you forgo the short-term pressure, and how you actually go into that determination to let go the.
Well, I think the basic thing is something's not working. Something in your life is repeatedly causing suffering, right? And that's what calls out to you. Say, well, I want to get past this. And how do I do it, right? So it has to come from your own sense of this hurts, but this keeps hurting, right? It's not just a one-off. It's just a pattern that I keep getting caught up into. So that's the basic inquiry. And why? What's going on? And then you try to return to the Four Noble Truths to say, what do I have that I don't want? And what do I want that I don't have? That's the basic pattern. And it's like I was saying last night in the talk, I've suffered a lot from fear, a lot of shyness and social anxieties and things like that. I'm okay now, but it was just so much torture, self-consciousness and so on. And I thought that the problem was the fear, but it was the desire not to have the fear. All right? So then I'd try to do something to alleviate the fear. I'd run away, I'd avoid things, or I'd play some kind of ego game or whatever. And only when I saw that, oh, it's not the fear that's the problem, it's the desire not to have the fear, that I began to see that fear is very unpleasant, but that the unpleasantness isn't the problem, it's me not wanting that. And emotionally, it's very profound. I can say it easily now. It took me a long time to see that. Then when I understood that, when I saw that link, I said, okay, this is what I have to work. Then I could say to myself, welcome the fear. Have metta for the fear. Give the fear a cup of coffee. Give it 2 cups of coffee. Let it stay forever. All those strategies began to make sense to me because I understood the mechanism. I understood the itching and scratching. And when I started to do that, it was terribly unpleasant. And that's where the determination came in, where I had to bear the unpleasantness of unfulfilled desire, the unpleasantness of feeling fear, of feeling anxious. I said, well, it's like this. I don't want that. No, it's like this. I don't know. It's like this. Back again and again and again. So when I became a monk, I always wore clothing which was unobtrusive. Then I had this outfit. You try to hide in a crowd with this outfit, right? So I'd be in like Chicago airport and I'd feel like a fish in a tree. Totally self-conscious, like everyone's watching me. Yes, they are. Very uncomfortable. I just want to hide under a newspaper. It's true. But I said, oh, no, okay, this is what you need. You need to walk into the crowd and feel self-conscious. So I, self-conscious is this way. And now it's gone. And I'm an anthropologist now. I really do. Oh, human beings. Yeah, interesting. And they look at me, I look at them. But it took a lot of painful observing and witnessing of a strong kamma towards fear. And the determination was there because I was just suffering from it. Not a very happy state of mind. But the determination had to, then the correct practice of the craft had to come from the inside. And that took persuasion from Ajahn Sumedho, Lompa Cha, people like that. Mostly Ajahn Sumedho. He says, no, it's not the fear. It's the desire not to have the fear, the vibhava tanha, as we say in Pali. And once I saw that, oh, okay, I got it. So then I understood metta bhavana, I have to welcome it. Then I understood endurance, this will change, the language of anicca dukkha anatta. All of that made sense around this emotion called fear. And then it kept ceasing, and then desire kept ceasing too, and awareness became stronger and stronger and stronger. So you have to understand your own predicament. What is it that your mind gets preoccupied with? Like why, in what ways does your sense of self get recreated? Through aversion to people, through self-judgment, self-doubt, through fantasizing about things, through creativity. Where does the ego, the sense of me and mine, the language of self-creating, how does that come up for you? What kind of moods, right? That's indicative of the kind of patterning of the mind, okay? So then you see that, the sense of self arises a lot with self-doubt, maybe always going to self-doubt. Or maybe it arises in criticism of others all the time. That idiot, right? Or whatever. And you see, okay, that's the pattern. So you're getting past the particulars of self-creations, of what we call I-making, mind-making. You're getting behind that to see what's the mood of that. So whatever I was afraid of, A, B, or C, didn't really matter because the pattern of fear was always the same. So, okay, you get kind of one level deeper into the way your consciousness is conditioned. You say, oh yeah, that's that same thing I had yesterday. It's just on a different object. Same problem. Now you're seeing the mood of the mind, the aramana, as we say, the mode of the mind, right? So, oh yeah, this is that mood of fear. Now you're more aware. Now you're no longer in the object of your fear. Now you know fear. And that's the education piece that you have to have. And it's an education piece which isn't conceptual. It's experiential. It's existential. It's like what's going on in your own heart. And then you get really good at it. And then you get the craft going. The craft of letting go. The craft of non-attachment. The different ways we talk about that. But just trying to get rid of something won't work because it's not grounded in wisdom. Does that sort of make sense? Yeah?
Hi, Ajahn. Thank you for your talk. My question is about the method of having this conversation with your fear or your desire to not have the fear. I think through my practice and understanding of the Buddhist practice, there's a lot of focus on inward reflection and trying to, through your own experience, understand your suffering. What do you say about sort of the more Western method of talking to a therapist about it, talking to a psychotherapist or a social worker about things? In a way, there is a bit of a desire created to talk to someone else, to share your problem.
Yeah.
And I have found that in my experience of engaging like a therapist to speak about my problems, then there's that sense of reliance on another person to help me process my experience. So I wonder what you would say about that and what Buddha would have.
Well, I think, I think if the therapist has a Buddhist background of anatta, and there are many kinds of therapy, right? And some therapists would say, you've got a problem. And Buddhism would say, don't make it a problem. So the skill of a therapist is that by talking to you skillfully, they draw out of you awareness of your predicament. Okay, so let's say someone has been abused by their father, say. Maybe a man has been abused by his father and he has a lot of rage and anger and so on. And he's so kind of caught in his rage and anger and projecting onto any authority figure, he can't see that. So he goes to the therapist. And first of all, he doesn't trust the therapist because it looks like his father. So he's got to get past that. Gets past that maybe, and the therapist starts to draw out of him this projection, anger, where it's coming from, and he becomes more aware of the mechanism of anger, why it's there. And in that awareness, he begins to have the tools to cultivate right view. If the therapist, however, says to him, you've got an anger problem, you've got an anger problem, then that would be antithetical to Buddhist values, because we're saying this is not you, this is a condition coming from causes that is impacting you and creating problems for you, but you have to see it through awareness. Huh? So I would say it can be good. I've certainly seen it very useful for people where mindfulness does not work, because mindfulness doesn't work sometimes for people who are kind of really damaged in some ways, because they can't access the sources of these things. If you are fully conscious of anger and fear and these different things, and you want to run it by someone to help you, that I wouldn't say that's dependency. I'd say it's kalyanamitta. It's a good friend who's helping you just verbalize, something that's going on with you. But if you start to get dependent on them, you'll know that, because then you're projecting onto them something which is more than they're offering. And if they're a good therapist, they'll cut that. If they're a bad therapist, they'll get more money out of you. So I would not dismiss it. There's a lot of very good therapeutic ideas around, like obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't have experience with that, but I know therapists who are very good with that, dealing with childhood trauma, But your average ordinary neurosis, I think you and I can talk about it and kind of get through it, and it's a lot cheaper. But if you do find someone who can really listen, because sometimes, like, we Buddhists don't listen well. We just say, "Oh, it's anicca." Right? Oh, thanks. Or it's anatta. It's not who you really are. Yeah. And we just spit. We call it. There's a good word for it. Buddha babble, or Dharma babble, right? We just and there's no wisdom in it. There's just this kind of party line. It's all anicca. Shut up. I don't want to hear about your problems. So a Kalyanamitta is a good listener, and not a preacher, not even a fixer. Sometimes we feel very uncomfortable with other people's suffering, and quite quickly we want to fix it. Well, if you do this, and that, if you do Anapanasati, you'll be okay. But we're not listening, and quite often, that I think is the best thing you can do, is in listening to someone, and I think this is what a good therapist does, in listening to someone, you elicit in them the problem, they begin to verbalize it, and they become aware of the problem. And that's quite often sufficient, right? So, like, I would say a good therapist gives you a lot of space to express things, doesn't fill your mind with ideas, but tries to help you pursue ideas to understand yourself. I mean, I've never been in therapy, but I know monks who have, because they've had various kinds of issues, and it's quite helpful, right? So I've seen mindfulness sometimes doesn't work. You need other kinds of tools. Is that all right? Yeah? Okay. No charge. We can't charge. Anything else?
Hey.
Okay, there you go.
My question is, earlier you mentioned that the ending of wanting and the ending of desire is what brings us peace. But you also talked about intelligent wanting and ignorant wanting.
Yes.
So it seems that there is space for us to want something intelligently, and
Yep.
that can be a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Could you speak more about the difference between intelligent wanting and ignorant wanting?
Good question. Yeah, good. It's good to bring that up. So let's say I like to make furniture, right? And actually, my mind keeps thinking of furniture. So, but I enjoy the creative process. I enjoy looking at a plank of wood and getting a design for a piece of furniture. I enjoy the process. So I want to make a piece of furniture. But I use that making, as a way of understanding my attachment to the product, my sloppiness in the doing, or my rushing in the doing, my self-judgment when it's not good. I use the very process of making as a way of understanding my mind. And so it becomes a vehicle for self-understanding rather than me being some fantastic furniture maker. So I think if you want to help your family, you want to help your culture flourish, you want to develop skills in your vocation and profession so that you're better at it. These are lovely things. These are good things. But if you do them as a vehicle for self-understanding, rather than just be caught in peer group pressures of being successful and having lots of stuff, right? Being caught in some egotistical drive to be the best or whatever, being caught in constant self-criticism, I'm not good enough, all of that would make that desire to be a good human and be a creative maker of things would spoil that. So we can see people who are creators who are very egotistical, and we can see creators who are not, who don't sign their work, don't need to sign their work, right? It's a very important question, because sometimes in Buddhism it sounds like you shouldn't want anything, so you just sit there like a monk. But monks want stuff, right? Right. So it's more, the intelligence is like, I think the intelligence comes also from a love of silence, from a love of stillness, from a appreciation of the the refinement of emptiness. You start in your meditation and your contemplation, as these grosser things start to fall away, you appreciate the uncreated, the unformed, the death, this kind of language we talk about. You appreciate, that's beautiful. So the need to do stuff falls away. And then the doing of stuff isn't coming from need, right? It's not coming from some need for fulfillment. It's just, I got time. Let's create something. Now, I can say that as a monk, you as a person who needs to put food on the table and pay for your mortgage, you can't say that. But how can you use your career, your vocation, your family life as a spiritual vehicle, as well as a vehicle for developing your talents, being creative, both? How can you make family life and business life your monastery? Because the monk and the monastery, they're just, they're archetypes. You know what an archetype is? It's like a symbolic image of something possible. And the monk is the archetype of the spiritual seeker, and the monastery is the archetype of livelihood, which is about spiritual seeking. But not all of us can be monks or nuns, but I think all of us has a bit of the monk and nun in us, especially us here. Otherwise we wouldn't be here, because we aspire to that. We want to realize that. So how do you make your family life one of understanding and yet giving and intelligent wanting there? So it's what happens. I don't know about here in Singapore, but in Canada or North America, the kind of spiritual model which people have picked up in Canada is coming from Christianity, Judaism, and to some extent Islam, the Abrahamic religions. And there, desire is portrayed as evil, bad, right? And so the suppression of desire is sometimes encouraged. I mean, they're not doing it very well, are they? But that, in a spiritual sense, that can be the same. Like, desire is bad. If you want something, you're a bad person, right? But Buddhism isn't saying desire is bad. It's just saying it's limited. Know its limitations, know what desire can do and cannot do, then you'll be wise with desire. But like let's say if I like milk in my coffee, do I have to feel guilty about that? Bad monk. He wants milk. It's ridiculous, isn't it, right? It's not about that. But if someone gives me coffee without milk and I start to have a tantrum, I know I've got a problem. Attachment to milk. So it's not wrong. It's just, it has its limits. And the more you investigate desire and watch, you see when desire is going into areas which aren't going to be fruitful. Like, let's say, I don't know, like social. I don't live in the world of social media and social pressures and Facebook and all of that. And with monasticism, you can't really go anywhere. You ordain and that's it. The guy next to you is always going to be senior. So there's no advancement. And in fact, no one wants to be an abbot. Everyone, so that whole competition becoming stuff we don't really do. But I imagine that in lay life, that would be a very strong thing. Competition and peer group values about what you look like or how you're performing or what kind of a car you drive and all kinds of that sense. And you can see how if desire is driven by that, you're a victim. You're a slave to that. But you might have to play the game. You need an outfit for work, right? And you need to do stuff and you need to have a decent car and so on and so on. So you can play the game. But if you're driven by peer group pressures that this will make you happy, you're in trouble because it won't. It won't make you happy. Which doesn't mean you have to get you can't buy a bad car in Singapore, can you? That's what William told me. They only have good cars here. You send the bad cars to Canada, probably. You see what I mean? So it is intelligent. And the intelligence will tell you, no, going in that direction, those desires, that doesn't work. That doesn't work for me. And that's the kind of buildup of wisdom, intelligence and stuff that it's a maturity, isn't it? You learn from those things.
Lately, a desire has crept up.
Uh-oh.
Well, you don't really have to say "oh," because it is not unwholesome.
It's skillful, okay.
Well, I lately came into the Dharma.
Yes.
That means I started reading the Dharma more and more seriously. And looking at my face, you know how old I am. Okay? So I do have a fear.
How old are you?
Well, it's not a secret, 74.
74.
So anyway, I have a feeling that the Dharma is really a very good teaching, the best teaching in the world. So I have a fear that will I be reincarnated into a Buddhist teaching world where the Buddhism is being taught. So I do have a fear. Will I be reincarnated as a human being again and be able to learn and practice Buddhism more and more? Is it a difficult problem?
Well, I don't know.
For me,
I have no idea, right? I mean, if I don't do that stuff.
well, I'm not asking you to do some magic.
But what you can know is you have a cultural mindset which says that you might be reborn. And all you know is that's a system of thinking that's been created by your culture. You don't know if it's true, but you believe in it. Okay? So, yeah. But what that does, it creates a sense of self. I am someone who has come to Buddhism recently, and it's good stuff, and I'm going to die soon, and then I might be reborn as a rabbit or something, right? So, but that's all created in thought. Well, what you really know, right, is there is awareness, and there is a whole thought pattern with a sense of self in it. Now, I would suggest that the best way to deal with that is to go to silence. Because if you go to that thought, you can never solve it. But all you do is create a sense of ego, me and my next birth, and more fear and more anxiety. But if you now if you just witness the very sense of what will happen in the future, then you come to the gateway of the unborn. Now Buddhism, the Buddha taught not for the sake of an upgrade. You get it? He didn't teach for the sake of a good rebirth. That's what I mean by upgrade. Some jokes don't fly. He taught. Why did he teach? Because he realized something. He realized the unconditioned and the unborn. Right? So certainly in the teaching it says that you can get an upgrade or you can get a downgrade. Be careful. All right? But his liberation wasn't about rebirth. It was the end of the cycle. Now, you might not believe in rebirth or whatever, but you can contemplate what is unborn, what is uncreated. And the only thing you really have is awareness. Because awareness knows thought, but awareness is not thought. Awareness knows feelings of security, but is not the feeling of security. Awareness knows the feelings of insecurity, but is not the feeling of insecurity. So when you are aware of that kind of thought pattern, you're inclining towards the unborn. When you grasp that thought pattern, you're inclining towards the born. Me being reborn, right? So I suggest you only got a little bit of time left, right? So go for the unborn. Don't worry about the upgrade. But to do that, you have to go to silence. To do that, you have to learn how to not believe in the self-making, I-making, my-making, and just come down to pure awareness. And you can do that very easily. You can just do it by listening. Like I always do this with people. Everyone do this with me, okay? Just listen. Just listen. Just listen. No, don't talk. And in the listening, are you listening? Just listen. There's silence. And if you can sustain that silence, now just do this with me, everyone. Is listen. Now, there is listening, right? Your mind is silent. You're not thinking about listening. You're just listening. Is there a me listening? Or is there just listening? Is there an extra bit called I and then the listening, like two things? Or is there just one thing, just listening? You do this. I can't find anything, can you? Just listening. That's what you have to do. Huh? So when doubts come up like that, I suggest don't try to figure it out, but go back to silence. And then when the body dies, it'll be very interesting. That's my suggestion. But if you keep precepts and you live generously, I'm optimistic. And like what you can do with your worldly life is just recollect the goodness of your life. You know, how you've taken care of your family, you know, how you've lived in society in a good way, and continue to be moral and generous and let all those positive things affect you, so that in this aging process that we have, you keep putting in good and wholesome things. But as a monk, obviously, I kind of signed up for what? Right? So I didn't sign up for rebirth. You know, I didn't go to Ajahn Chah, how can you fix me up with a Lexus next lifetime? You see what I mean? Anyone else? There you go.
All right, thank you very much. I have one question where my friends are asking me, I have the same question, and that is, when one's occupation that involves killing, should a Buddhist change his work if he or she intends to be a real Buddhist? And so please define what is a Buddhist. Thank you.
Please define what is a Buddhist. All right, which one first? Should we do killing? Okay. Well, what happens to your mind if you kill a human, like a soldier? They have PTSD. People, you know, and soldiers come back, and I've heard Singapore's never had a war. True? That's beautiful. People in the States, the place just south of Canada, you know, soldiers come back with PTSD. So obviously, killing at a really violent level has atrocious results, just atrocious results. So to be a soldier, not a good idea, I would say. Then shooting a deer. We have all around the monastery. We have some of the best deer hunting in Eastern Ontario. Deer just come in and out, and then the hunting season, they're all out there, and they all tell us, wear a red hat because we look like deer. True. It's very true. So we hear boom, boom. So what happens to the hunter that kills the deer? Well, that hunter has to somehow close off connection to the deer. You know, there has to be some sense of otherness. I'm here, the deer's there. Now, certainly the guys that hunt, they're respectful hunters in the sense that they eat the meat and so on. But still, what happens to the mind that kills an animal? Then the mind has to be somehow cut off from love and compassion in some way, creating self and other. And in Buddhism, that would be not a good result, just in this lifetime, right? If you work in an abattoir. So that's hands-on killing, right? So I would say that would be something that in Buddhist livelihood we would consider wrong. Pest control. What if you have an infestation of termites? Do you have termites here? Yes. Right? and they're knocking your house down. What do? I guess you call the exterminator, right? It's his karma. I don't know. So life has these kind of moral difficulties, but I think the act of killing, and the more deliberate it is, creates very bad results in the mind. So it's not about being a Buddhist. It's really about what are you doing in your life, and what are the results that that's creating in your mind, and are they skillful or unskillful? Are they conducive to your well-being and the well-being of others? And what are the things we're trying to do? Is we're trying to develop love and compassion and generosity, and not cut ourselves off from that. You get other kinds of questions like vegetarianism, right? And, by eating a McDonald's hamburger, am I killing cows? No, you're eating a McDonald's hamburger. So if I decide, in terms of the first precept, if I decide to be a vegetarian, I'm doing something else. I'm practicing renunciation, and I'm practicing a renunciation because I feel that the animal industry is inappropriate. So I'm giving something up. I'm giving up greed if I like meat, which isn't the same as the first precept. The first precept is about not killing. So sometimes in discussions around the first precept, people say, well, how can you Theravada people eat meat? Well, it's different. It's different. Like to kill a cow and to buy a hamburger is a whole different experience, right? One is about greed, and one is about killing. And we're looking at how the mind operates. So whoever you're talking about in terms of killing, I would say, what is the effect on the mind? Is it a good effect? And I should think it's not. When you meditate a lot, even an insect is interesting, isn't it? You see a beetle. Mosquitoes I still have a hard time with. But I'm getting better at it. But when you've been meditating and your heart's very empty and clean, you look at the fact your nature's so beautiful, fascinating, like a cockroach even. If you're not, cockroach, well, that's an interesting critter. So certainly you have to do something for hygiene and so on and so forth. But I think we're moving towards a mind which isn't separate, which isn't alienated, which isn't fearful, because it's kind of connected. So what is a Buddhist? A Buddhist isn't like I would say someone who is living by moral values, trying to live a life of concern and care for their society and family in terms of generosity, and is reflective on suffering, and reflects on the causes of suffering and the end of suffering. I see that would kind of define for me what a Buddhist would be doing. It's a doing rather than a believing. I had an interesting experience in Auckland, in New Zealand. I used to live in New Zealand for 10 years, and every month I'd go up to Auckland. I was living in Wellington, and we'd have a kind of day-long meditation and so on. And we'd have a big on a Saturday, and on a Sunday there'd be a big dana, and many people would come. And in the vihara I was staying, I would go out for a walk, and one day I met a gentleman next door who was from India, and who had a beautiful spirituality, but his conceptual framework was Hindu, and so he used the word God, right? Just a beautiful man, beautiful man. So I invited him. I said, "Why don't you come and join us for the dana?" So he came the next day, and I was sitting there, and he was sitting there, and a woman from a traditional Buddhist society came, and she sat down, and he started to talk about God. And she said to him, "We don't believe in God, we believe in anatta." I wanted to kill her. She was totally lacking in compassion, totally lacking in sensitivity, because she was a Buddhist, and he was a Hindu, and of course that's not Buddhism. That's not Buddhism. So Buddhism is a belief, it's a lifestyle, isn't it? It's what you do and how you do it. And then I think the depth of it comes from the depth of Buddhism, if it's going to be a spiritual practice, because parts of Buddhism are simply a social practice, good social practice, but everyone does that if they're decent human beings. I would think it comes from the Buddha's enlightenment, and that the Buddha's enlightenment is something you're curious about. What did this man realize? And why did he teach the way he taught? And I would say it's an optimism. It's an optimism about the human condition, that the human condition has this possibility of enlightenment, and that one is interested and inspired by the Buddha's example and takes on his teaching in a very profound way to have that kind of realization. Then I would think you're fulfilling, the Buddha's words to us. Buddhism as dana and sila is great. That's the foundation. But if one wasn't interested in that, it wouldn't be a spiritual practice. It'll be a good worldly practice and would give good results. But I keep looking at this picture of the Buddha right here. I keep thinking, what did this being realize? Why did he teach the way he teach? I think that curiosity would be, to me, a kind of defining element. Does that cover it, or the killing thing, or didn't cover it?
My question is actually, in Canada, you do have people have a farm, animal farms.
Yeah.
The cows.
Sure, lots. All around.
Cow or something else. So they are the one who are asking me. They are learning all these things, and if they want to be a Buddhist, and they have been in many generations having those farms,
yeah,
how can they become Buddhists? Do they have to eat the farm?
Well, to be a farmer implies the exploitation of the animals, and you can't get around it. So they can still do the Buddhist practice, but that one precept about exploitation of animals, they would still have the results, and the results would be mental, right? And it's not like, the mind is the mind. And whatever you do, there are going to be consequences. It's not like, if you take on the Buddhist label, then it's okay to do farming. Or it's okay to do farming because people want milk. But that's not what it's about. It's what happens to the mind, right? And the animal industry, like some farmers, like I've seen Swiss farmers who are more in love with their cows than their wives. I've seen it. It's like, and they treat their animals really, quite wonderfully. Whereas I've seen other farms where like chicken farms, it's horrible what they do. So it depends, like the quality of attention to the animals would determine the result on the mind. So if one was just brutal with the animals, which quite often happens in the animal industry, then that brutality is a karmic formation, right? If one is very kind to the animals, and kind and considerate and takes care of them and lets them coexist and takes their milk or whatever, that would be a different kind of mindset, right? Sheep farming halves the life of sheep. By taking the wool and dipping their feet and all that halves the life of a sheep. So they're doing something. And you just can't get around that. The mind does that. So I would say to someone who is a farmer, I say, be compassionate to your animals. Care for your animals. Take the products you need, coexist with them the best you can. But then you'll have the problem when the cow isn't productive and you kill it. You send it to the slaughterhouse. Or you have the problem of veal. The baby males, right? If it's a cattle farm, they get sent to the slaughterhouse because it's a good price. So, and how does that affect the mind? It has to affect the mind some way. So it's not so much a Buddha. What the Buddha is talking about is nature, rather than like a belief system. If you harm someone, you're going to get a harmful result. Not in terms of a future life, but right now, and that you can't get around because that's dharma, right? And so it's not like, how can I be a Buddhist and kill a baby calf? Well, if you kill a baby calf, you get the result of killing a baby calf. Whether you call yourself Buddhist or Mickey Mouse, you get the result. That's the way it is. So it's not a matter of identity; it's a matter of dharma, and the dharma is this way. It's the truth of the way things are. Right? And there was a woman who came to the monastery once, and she had a love of animals, and she worked with animals, and she worked on a dairy farm, in fact, and she just found it so heartrending, the brutality that the animals experienced. So she was working on the farm, but her heart was very compassionate. So she wasn't creating any bad karma that way. Yeah? But she really suffered from that. So it's about the mind, and what the mind does. Okay.
So my question is regarding if one can actually practice well and interweave the spiritual, the Buddhist view, conduct into our family and professional life, then when, if any, or why should one then make the transition towards full monastic life? Would that,
Yeah.
when would one know that?
Well, when your kids are grown up, when you've paid off the mortgage. I think the question is do you have a choice? To not integrate Dharma into your life, to me, would seem very foolish. It's not so much can you, how would you not do that? And in other words, Dharmic life is awareness, right? So to not be aware and to be asleep would be a very foolish thing to do, right? And once you start the practice of awareness, you can't stop. Once you start, as a monk, I used to remember, oh God, I just want to go to a pub and drink beer. I've had enough of this, right? I'm so fed up, and my knees are killing me, and I've got typhoid, and I'm lying there in this country I don't even know. I said, just give me some peanuts and beer. I want to get out of here. But I stuck with it. Because once you're awake, you can't go back. It's a kind of once you're awake, you just got to keep doing this until you're enlightened. Because the awake mind is not going to settle for anything less. And it's not a curse, but it's a demand from the awake mind. Your destiny is enlightenment, and you must do this for enlightenment. Okay, so I like to say that how can I integrate? You have to. You just have to wake up, and you do, don't you? You get better at it. But when would you become a monastic? Well, not to run away, not when you're fed up, not when you want to, not when you're bankrupt. That you'd have the situation, the worldly situation where worldly things would become uninteresting, right? I mean, you need a situation. If you have family, then that's your monastery. If you have kids, that's your monastery. But there might come a time in your life you felt, worldly things, I'm not interested. And you might be interested in picking up the ideas that the Buddha gave the monks about lifestyle. The Dharma is the same. The Dharma, you see, we all have access to the texts. It's the same Dharma. But the lifestyle is around Vinaya, the monastic code, and that can only be lived in community. You can't live the Vinaya in family life. It wouldn't make sense. So then you get interested in this particular tool the Buddha developed, and say someone like Ajahn Chah helped us, the tool of Vinaya, because it's a tool, right? It's a craft that you learn to use. And then you might find a teacher and be inspired to do that, and then you take that as a vocation. But you'd have to be inclined that way. Now, a lot of people aren't inclined that way, but they have very good practice. They, just to have kids is a huge practice. I don't think I could do it. To give to children and to be patient with them and so on and so forth, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful practice. You develop beautiful things. So not to see these things as the sort of exclusive to monasticism. It isn't. Not at all. But say for women, monasticism is very limited in Theravada. It's got a history of limitations now. And so it's more difficult to find teachers in monasteries. In Mahayana, it's much more prevalent. I've heard in Taiwan they have more nuns than monks. Whereas in Theravada, it's got a history of an undeveloped history of women's monasticism. So you have problems that way, in monasteries and so forth. But for me, why did I do this? Well, it's just accident. I didn't do it. It sort of happened to me. So I was in India, and I had some experiences in meditation which which gave me inspiration. And then I happened to meet a monk. And I said, yeah, I had nothing else to do. I was 24, 25. Okay, I'll give this a go. And I went to Thailand and became a monk. Yeah? Now, if I would have had family and kids and I came across the Dharma, well, that would not be. My vocation would be kids. So then I just had the very good fortune of meeting a teacher and so on. But having been a monk for all these years, I've seen a lot of men come and go. It didn't work for them. And there's nothing wrong with that. That this life it wasn't an effective tool for them. And they went back to family life, which was better for them, actually. They could practice better. It was more for whatever reason. Right? So it doesn't work for everyone. It's not a life for everyone. You have to have a particular character. So don't shave your head. It's okay.
Good evening, Long Talk. Actually, when I read the sutta, actually what Buddha said is that if we have no choice about whether to become a vegetarian, to eat meat or vegetable, so he said if you have no choice, then you can eat meat. But he didn't say that you can eat meat. He said that in the case of the monks, where they have no choice because the food are being offered, so they can eat meat.
Yeah.
So another thing is that.
Well, wait. So wait. So what are you saying here now? What's your point there? I'm not getting it.
No, because I notice many people like to argue about why are Buddhists so compassionate and they eat meat.
Oh, okay, right.
They argue non-stop.
Yeah.
Because they didn't read the sutta. If they read the sutta, what Buddha said.
Oh, they love arguing.
Yeah.
They enjoy arguing. Okay, so I can tell you how we do it. So as a monk, I think the Buddhist instruction to me is to be grateful for what's offered. But when the monastery buys food, and sometimes we do, we never buy meat. So we make an economic decision as a monastery never to buy meat or meat products. But then if someone brings something, I just try to practice gratitude for what's offered. But anyway, what's your question?
No, because another thing is that for many Buddhists always said that they don't believe in God, but actually what Buddha said in the sutta was do not rely on God. You can ask God for help, but do not rely, but you have to put in effort. And Brahma God is the highest God, where the name is Baka. That is what Buddha said in the sutta. So Buddhists do believe in God, but do not rely on God. It's all through your own effort that you are enlightened. That is what Buddha said, isn't it?
Well, when you say Buddhists believe in God, that's a pretty broad brush. It's like 100% of Buddhists believe in the Brahma gods. Or are you saying the texts say that?
It's in the sutta, and also Buddha said that I have met God. When somebody asks you, have you met God?
Yeah.
You can't answer, but he said that I have met God and God had challenged him. It is all in the sutta.
And okay, so what's your question?
It's in Tika Nikaya, if I'm not wrong.
No, but what's your question?
No, because I know.
Are you're giving me a lecture here? Or what? What's going on here?
No, because when I come across Buddhists, they always like to argue about these questions.
And you're telling us what it is.
And I know, I
Very
think
compassionate.
it's a waste of time in arguing.
I agree. So what's your question?
Yeah, Longpo, because my late teacher asked me to get somebody to teach me how to get help from God, but I couldn't get anybody to.
I've never had that problem. Well. Anyway, one of the things we suffer from in culture is what we call Silabbata Paramasa, which is belief in rites and rituals. And a lot of our suffering comes from cultural identity. And sometimes it's religious identity, sometimes it's gender identity. You think like how a woman should dress, or what a woman should be, or what a mom should be, or what a dad should be. Some of those are good values, but sometimes they have a lot of cultural pressure. And that's what we call Silabbata Paramasa. Facebook is a good example of that. How many hits did you have today? You're cool. I've never seen a Facebook page, but people tell me. You can see, so there's a cultural attachment to being liked. And then people adjust their personality to fit a cultural norm, and so on and so forth. And that's not right or wrong, but it can certainly condition a sense of self around those things. So these beliefs we have about gods or not gods, all you can really know, unless you're a psychic, you can know it comes from a text, and you can know that you believe it or don't believe it. That's the honest thing, isn't it? So for me, I don't know. It's there, but somehow it's not very important. And I know that I don't know. That's important, right? And if someone says, it's true, I saw it yesterday, I said, oh, that must be nice. But I haven't. And if someone says it's not true, I didn't see it, I still don't know. And I think the honest thing then in culture is there's stuff that we believe that culture has told us is true, but we don't really know. But what can we really know is we can know this moment, and we can know suffering and the end of suffering. That you can know for sure, whatever belief system you have. So you don't have to dismiss it, but you can see, I certainly believe in rebirth, but I don't know if it's true. I haven't got a psychic bone in my body, right? So I believe, but I know that I don't know. And that to me is more important than the belief. I know that I don't know. Because it's that knowing that takes me to the deepest peace. Now, if I was a cynical person, I am a kind of cynical person actually. and I can be quite dismissive of stuff. I'm less so now, I'm a bit more mature. But I could be, I could be very dismissive. And why am I dismissive? Because I haven't experienced it. That's all. But are my parameters somehow ultimate? Are the things that I see and view the ultimate answer in cosmology? No, I don't. I'm very, very limited. So what's the honest thing is that there are things I believe, text which I believe or I don't believe, and then things which I don't know. So there's a lot I don't know. But I do know what the cause of suffering is. And that's what liberates, right? As opposed to a belief. All right, so I think that was it. That was the number of questions allowed.
The other says would be back to appreciation of what